Getting started. So, when you open up Unity and set up a 3D game, this is the environment you're provided with. Looks very similar to a 2D game. Apart from this part of your scene, you can clearly see that it's 3D with X, Y, and Z. So, this is our scene. We've also got over here on the left-hand side our hierarchy. So, these are the things we add to our game. We've already got the main camera in there, and you'll notice in the inspector, which is basically the properties over on the right-hand side, it gives you where the camera is in terms of its position, how it's rotated, its scale, and so on. So -10 means it's currently up in the air. We can choose other bits and pieces on this as well. And there's also the directional light, which we'll come back to a little bit later. Now, before I talk about the tools up on the top here and this area at the bottom of the screen, I'm actually going to add a ground. So if I go to the plus sign in underneath hierarchy, 3D object and cube, then a cube appears at position 0, 0, and 0. Now you'll notice that it's not rotated at all and the scale is currently 1, 1, and 1. So over here on the left-hand side, we can click on the hand to move our view around. We can click on this to actually move a shape left, right, up, down, and so on. And we can also rotate it and we can also scale it. Now, if I grab this blue area for scaling, what you should notice up here on the right hand side that the scale has actually gone up from 1 to 2.7 to 5 to 6 to 7 and so on. So I can manually decide how big it's going to be, or potentially, if I already know what size I want my ground to be, I can just basically type in the X as what those numbers are. So I'm not doing Y because Y is supposed to be the ground, the height of it. And in fact, it could probably be less than 1, but that's okay for the time being. So I've done it 20 by 20. Now at the moment, if I go to the main camera, it shows me what I can see within gameplay. And I've also got this tab here, which if I click on game, it basically does a full screen version of it as well. So this looks like an Arctic scene at this point in time. Now I don't want that to happen. I actually want it to be like a color or like a texture. So I could potentially add a color to it. And you'll notice at the moment with the cube, oh, I don't want it to be called cube. I want it to be called ground. So I can change that here in the inspector. There is this default material thing here, but it doesn't kind of work very well. So we're going to actually try to add bits and pieces here. But to actually make it easier, I've downloaded an image which I'm going to use for my texture, which is grass. So if I go to assets and import new asset, and on my desktop, I have a 2D image of grass and it appears here and it gives us some details if you want to be looking at those. And all I need to do is drag and drop that onto my ground and it puts it on there. And it looks great actually from that point of view. Let's have a look what it looks like in my game. Oh, actually it looks a little bit blurry. It looks a little bit pixelated. And the reason why is because my grass has been stretched out over this. So what we'll need to do, we'll need to kind of make sure that it's not stretched out and it's not poor quality. So on our ground, on our grass material, which has appeared here, if I click on the arrow and I scroll down, you'll find tiling just underneath emission. So if I change that to 10 by 10, now you can see that the grass is now in 10 by 10 sections, but the issue is the outer parts of my grass image are kind of darker, so I'd need to maybe change that. But just for the time being, if I come to main camera or I go to game, then that looks a lot better kind of quality, what I can see there. Right, now back on my scene, I've got my ground. Now I want to add a player. So I'm basically going to add in a 3D object and a capsule. And at the moment, you can see he's kind of like half in, half out of the ground. So if I go to game, he's only just his head sticking out. So I just need to lift him up using the move tool into the position I want him to go. And again, if I go to the game, he's a little bit in the distance. So let's actually bring him closer to our camera. So if I drag him up to there, then, and if we go to game, there he is, and he is floating a little bit as well. And in fact, while we're here, I'm actually not going to call him capsule. I actually want to give him a proper name like player, and you can see now that our position is X, Y, and Z. Like so, it adds a collider to it, which is really good. And the ground should also have a collider to add it to it as well, which is great. It doesn't do that on the 2D games for some reason, but it does on 3D. But I want to actually make my camera a little bit higher than it is. And you can see down in the bottom right here how it's actually looking. So I'm kind of looking down on him. And if I rotate it a little bit, I can see it like so. And if I go back to game again, Yeah, that's a bit better. So I'm actually looking down on him. Now the other thing, the directional light. Now our light is currently back here. So do I want it to be a little bit higher? Do I want it to be rotated to go straight down? I'm just messing around with this to see what I can do. And I can also change bits and pieces here if I want to. But let's just have a look at the main camera. Has that made much of a difference? I don't know actually, but it looks okay, so I'm going to keep it as it is. And the last thing I want to do, our player, he's currently just got this white color again, which is kind of this default material. I'm actually going to add the material here to the mesh renderer. So what I'll need to do is right click down here, click on create, and go to material. And on the material, I can choose what color he's going to be. I'm just going to stick with red, that's fine. And I'm also going to make it quite metallic looking. So I'm just going to drag that up. Now at this point in time, nothing's happening to our player because we haven't actually attached this to him. So if we go back to player, and where it says default material, I can click on the arrow and go and find my new material here, or I could just literally just drag and drop rep. So if I click on new material and double click on it, oh, it didn't work. Where's the color? It didn't do the color for some reason. There we go. So now it's added a color to him. So let's have a look at the main camera to see what that looks like, or the game here. And there's my player. And now if I want to mess around with the material and the sharpness and so on, then I can actually see what it's doing here. So I can literally play around and see what that looks like. Right, last thing, at the top here, you've got this play sign. So if I click on play, that will play our game. Now at this stage, all I've done is added a cube, put some grass on it, and added a capsule and make it look red. And literally that's all we've done and messed around with the camera. So when we press play, nothing will happen. So at this point, we haven't done any coding to make anything happen, but I kind of don't want my player to be floating. I actually want him to be in contact with the ground. So I'm going to add something called a rigid body to it. So if I click on add component where the inspector is for the player, and you'll need to add rigid bodies to things to be able to make them collide into things and react to things, especially coding wise. And I've just added a rigid body and use gravity selected. So now this time when I press play, it will run our game and our player should drop to the ground. There we go. Now, it doesn't fall through the ground because the ground has got a box collider on it, or a collider, and I've got a collider as well, which will help stop me going through the ground as well. So, in that respect, that's all we really need to do for this point. But in our next video, let's actually look at terrain. So we can actually have, rather than a flat surface, we can have like bumps and areas which look like mountains and things like that then.